country safer, it comes at a fraction of the cost of what we're spending. Mr. Speaker, for the sake of our national conscience, also for our national treasury, it's time to do the smart thing and bring our troops home. Don't ask me, ask Colonel Daniel Davis. I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Dold, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, small businesses are reluctant to expand today. With so much economic uncertainty, our local job creators don't know if they can afford the risk of hiring a new worker. As a small business owner myself, I know the pressures of meeting a budget and a payroll, and for me, I employ 100 people, and for me, that's 100 families. I have to make sure that I can ensure that we can provide health care insurance and other benefits before it's time to hire new workers. Mr. Speaker, there's 29 million small businesses in our nation. Here in this body, I believe our goal has to be to create an environment that enables those small businesses to have the confidence to be able to grow and thrive, to be able to add that one new worker. And think about where we'd be at that point in time, Mr. Speaker. 29 million businesses across the nation, all hiring just one worker. We'd have a different problem on our hands. The partisan rhetoric and the lack of progress in Washington is hindering businesses from hiring more people. But I do believe that we can come together and tackle some of these problems. Washington has to stop viewing legislation through a political lens and start viewing it through the eyes of the American people. One area we can agree upon is the payroll tax extension. The House voted at the end of the year to extend it for an additional year. The President has asked that we extend it for a year. The holdup is yet again in the United States Senate. Senator Harry Reid would rather play political games with this important measure. And now some members are asking for a 2-month extension. Mr. Speaker, I say enough is enough. We need to extend this tax holiday for the entire year. Small businesses don't have the luxury of hoping that we'll get it right. So let's come together today and pass the year-long extension in both the House and the Senate. Let's give hard-working American taxpayers the relief that they need. Mr. Speaker, new regulations are also hindering small businesses from expanding. With hundreds of pages of new regulations in the President's health care law, hundreds of rules that have still yet to be written in financial services with regard to Dodd-Frank are hindering the financial services industry. Small businesses do not know what new rules are coming next, and thus they can't prepare for the future. And job growth remains, at best, uncertain. But we can and must find common ground on regulations. No one's arguing for the elimination of regulation, Mr. Speaker. What we need is smart regulations. It's vitally important that we have clean water, safe working environments, and rules to protect families' investments. Even the President has called for smarter regulations and repealing burdensome regulations that are around this nation. We can repeal burdensome regulations that are nothing more than red tape and barriers for job creators. And we can replace them with smart regulations that truly make our country better and give job creators the certainty they need to grow and thrive. Finally, Mr. Speaker, we must stop the enormous deficit spending that's going on right here in Washington, D.C. This next year, Mr. Speaker, we're faced with another $1 trillion deficit. If my business, my small business back in Illinois, ran the way the government runs, I'd be out of business inside of the month. It's time we in Washington rein in this out-of-control spending. We cannot ask hardworking American families all across the country to live within their means, but then turn around and allow Washington to take their hard-earned money and spend it without regard to the future consequences of our children and grandchildren. It's time that we pass a budget that puts our country on a viable economic path forward. When we do this, it will signal to the rest of the world that we are serious about our economic health, and thus we'll be able to empower job creators to invest here at home, to create jobs right here in our local communities. Mr. Speaker, I am optimistic about the future. I'm optimistic that we can do this, that we can come together. Spurring our economy and talking about growth isn't a Republican idea or a Democratic idea, but it is certainly an American idea. It's time that we put people before politics and progress before partisanship. It's time for us to work together today for the future of our country and get America back to work. With that, I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Wisconsin, Ms. Moore, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask permission to address the House for 5 minutes to revise and extend my remarks and put extraneous material into the record.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I'm here today to be a voice for the millions of women and men who are celebrating the recent decision by the Secretary of Health and Human Services regarding requiring all businesses and corporations to provide birth control insurance coverage, a life-saving benefit for women, millions of women. Under this new rule, virtually all women would have access to birth control coverage without a copay through their employer health plan. If you listen to the political pundits in this town, you will come to the conclusion that people do not support the Obama administration's decision, that people of faith are en route to the White House, prepared to storm it because of this decision. But if you talk to the average American, you will realize that there is absolutely overwhelming support for the decision on the birth control benefit. This support crosses party lines as well as religious affiliation. In fact, a poll released just yesterday found that roughly 6 in 10 Catholics support requiring employers to provide their employees with health care plans that cover contraceptives. Let's be clear. This decision represents a respectful balance between religious persons and institutions and individual freedom. It is very important to clarify that the law contains an exemption for religious institutions. What that means is that approximately 335,000 churches or houses of worship can choose not to provide birth control coverages for their employees. So if you're the secretary at the church or if you are employed by the archdiocese, they do not have to provide birth control coverage for their employees. The Health and Human Services was very important for them to carve out this exception in respect of separating church and state concerns. We're not requiring Catholic churches to go out and buy contraceptive coverage for all in spite of what you have heard over TV. But this rule does require that religiously affiliated universities and hospitals, which are operating as large businesses and employ and serve a diverse array of people, would have to follow the same rules as other businesses. This is the part that keeps getting lost in the debate. The sole purposes of these institutions is not to offer people a place of refuge and worship. It is not a place for people of faith to go to gather in fellowship and worship. The purpose of these institutions is to provide health care, is to provide an education, football teams for their clients or for their students. No one is trying to take away religious freedom, but rather this ruling preserves personal freedom. The concept of separation of church and state protects these 335,000 places of worship. But the concept of separation of church and state does not mean that a church can use their bully pulpit to separate millions of women from critical health care benefits. Just imagine that women on average spend 30 years attempting to prevent pregnancy. Just think about what it means for the health of a woman the health of her family to give birth or try dying for 30 years. And I understand that some people are worried and protective of their religious freedom, in part because they're being misled by what this HHS ruling actually does. But I also worry that some people in the faith community are being exploited and used to create a diversion. Another fact that people keep ignoring is that many religiously affiliated hospitals and universities already provide birth control to their employees through their insurance packages. I mean, it's standard at many of these workplaces. This is a non-issue for many Catholic and religiously affiliated colleges and universities already. And we're not talking about just a few workers. We're talking about millions of secretaries, janitorial staff, nurses' aides, lab techs of many different beliefs, some of no beliefs. So I would hope that we would not try to use religious bullying to deprive millions of women of critical, vital health care. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Barletta, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, a few weeks ago, President Obama stood in this very chamber and spoke about the need for fairness. Fairness, he said, is an American value. Yet the President and his administration are blatantly ignoring one of the most basic of American values, the freedom of religion. I'm referring to the decision by the Obama administration to force Catholic employers to provide insurance that includes coverage for sterilization, abortion-inducing drugs, and contraception. Catholic employers who fail to provide that insurance coverage could be fined $2,000 per employee per year. And the Obama administration will force Catholics to buy insurance coverage that includes coverage for services that many of them find morally wrong. For many Catholics, this requirement violates their core beliefs about the sanctity of life of the unborn. The health care law that is forcing Catholics to put their government ahead of their God includes a religious conscience exemption. It allows people with certain religious objections to opt out, and some religious groups have been allowed to opt out, but Catholics have been denied an opt-out. Instead, the Obama administration is forcing Catholics to violate their religious conscience. This is not the United States of America that I know. Religious tolerance has been a bedrock principle of the American government for almost 240 years. It's one of the reasons why the United States came to exist in the first place. The First Amendment states that Americans have the right to religious freedom. Religious freedom isn't just the ability to believe and worship as we see fit. It's also our right to keep our beliefs from being imposed on us. The federal government has respected those rights by being sensitive, by creating tolerant policies regarding our military service, our tax policies, and even our airport screenings. American Catholics are not asking for special rights. We're asking for equal rights. I'm proudly pro-life, and I will stand here to defend the rights of the unborn. But this isn't about abortion. This isn't a question of when life begins. This is about the fundamental rights of all Americans, as spelled out in our founding documents. And this decision by the Obama administration is a devastating blow against the freedom of religion. It's one thing for the federal government to try to take over our health care system, and we can all debate the merits of such legislation. But I think we can all agree, no matter on what side of the aisle we stand, that the right to freely express our religious beliefs, and more importantly, not have other beliefs forced upon us, is a core value of this country. It is non-negotiable. People of all faiths should be outraged by this decision. If this administration can trample over the beliefs and rights of the American Catholics, those of other religions should ask, are we next? Yesterday, I read in the New York Times that legal scholars say the American Constitution is old and outdated, that it isn't relevant in the modern world. Now, as this administration ignores our most treasured values, not religious values, but American values, our Constitution could not be more relevant. The first words of the American Bill of Rights are, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. They're first, and they're first for a reason. The United States of America has long been a place of religious freedom. It's one of the things that separates us from foreign countries. Just as the federal government should not endorse a religion, it should not punish a religion. All religions must be treated equally. They must be respected. That's the American way. Today, Catholics all across the United States feel like outsiders. They feel like their government has betrayed them. Catholic leaders, including 3 bishops that lead Catholics in my district, have clearly said they cannot and will not comply with this unjust decision by the Obama administration. No one should have to choose between their God and their government. No one, especially a government founded on religious freedom, should force them to. The decision by this administration to make Catholics violate their most basic principles is a violation of the most basic American principle. I strongly condemn the Obama administration for this outrageous overreach of federal authority, and I strongly encourage the administration to rescind this unfair, un-American policy. If the Obama administration can take away this most basic American value for 80 million Catholics, who's next? I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Harper, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, in an effort to create American jobs and move an energy supply from a friendly trading partner to the United States Gulf Coast, the House Energy and Commerce Committee favorably reported H.R. 3548 to the full House. H.R. 3548, the North American Energy Access Act, would end a waiting game that has lasted for over 3 years by pushing forward approval of the Keystone XL pipeline. In his State of the Union speech 2 weeks ago, the President promised to significantly expand production of oil and natural gas from offshore and onshore public lands. Unfortunately, but not surprisingly, he never mentioned his decision to reject the Keystone XL pipeline. While the President's comments about expanding oil and gas production in the U.S. were welcome news to many, I'm not sure how many people took his pledge seriously given his decision on Keystone XL. I am hopeful that the President will follow through on expanding production. I just wish he would have helped our country reduce our dependence on Middle Eastern oil while creating tens of thousands of jobs here in America by approving the pipeline application. The President's excuse for not approving the pipeline application was that he didn't have enough time. Radical environmentalists say that tar sands crude is the dirtiest of all, and they talk as if that's something foreign, something new. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to point your attention to a Friday, February 3rd, 2012 article on the front page of the National Journal, an article that I believe shows the fallacies in the arguments against the pipeline. The article states that despite environmental opposition, the Obama administration has approved a controversial oil sands pipeline. The article refers to an oil sands pipeline approved by the administration over 2 years ago. On August 20, 2009, Secretary of State Clinton approved a 1,000-mile pipeline with the capacity to carry 800,000 barrels of oil from Canada's oil sands to Wisconsin. Mr. Speaker, if a pipeline that closely mirrors that of the proposed Keystone XL was good enough for the President in August of 2009, why is the Keystone XL pipeline not good enough for him in an election year? If time and the environment were reasons to deny Keystone XL in January 2012, they should have had the same reasons to deny the Canada-Wisconsin pipeline in 2009. Keystone XL is a shovel-ready construction project that doesn't need a stimulus bill to get it started. Estimates show that the project could create 20,000 construction jobs immediately and could transport more than 1 million barrels of oil per day from Canada and the Bakken Shale Formation in North Dakota and Montana to Gulf Coast refineries. With the ability to transport that amount of friendly oil from our largest trading partner and neighbor to the north, Canada, as well as domestic oil, and with the ability to create an additional estimated 100,000 jobs over the lifetime of the pipeline, it's no wonder why the American public supports Keystone XL. At a time when unemployment and prices at the pump are high and new predictions say gasoline could top $4 this year, it's no wonder that the American public was disappointed in the President's decision. In a recent installment of the United Technologies National Journal Congressional Connection poll, Americans surveyed were asked, supporters of the pipeline say it will ease America's dependence on Mideast oil and create jobs. Opponents fear the environmental impact of building a pipeline. What about you? Do you support or oppose building the Keystone XL pipeline? 64% of the respondents favored the construction of Keystone XL, and only 22% were opposed. Mr. Speaker, Keystone XL makes sense. It means jobs, energy security, and satisfaction for the American public. The President made a political decision to pander to his extreme environmentalist supporters in a campaign year instead of listening to the majority of the American public, and that was unfortunate. I think that House Republicans are making it well known that the fight for Keystone XL is not over. Support in the House to move the pipeline forward has been bipartisan, very public, and very well received by the American people. As of yesterday, that support has produced a bill to push Keystone XL forward. I look forward to continuing my commitment to jobs, energy security, and the building of Keystone XL pipeline, and I yield back my time.
You want to go? Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, for 5 minutes. Without objection.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for giving us an opportunity to share on some enormously crucial human catastrophes that are occurring around the world. I'm challenging all of my colleagues and those who would listen that sometimes we are, in fact, through peaceful means, our brothers and sisters' keeper. First, as we have seen the ascending violence occur in Syria, a nation-state that I have visited, bloodshed that has included the loss of women and children, hearing news reports where citizens of Syria are begging for someone to do something. It is almost as if you came out of your house and stood by as your neighbor's house burned. We know in America many try to get a garden hose. Others call 911, but they do something because of the horror of what they're seeing. And constantly our media airwaves are being beat with the sounds of gunshot, smoke, and devastation, and the steadfast refusal of Dr. Assad to step down. His first representation was that these were al-Qaeda and terrorists, and we need to listen to him. And there is a general respect for the sovereignty of a nation. And I'm not one pushing the immediate attack by the United States. The American people have spoken on their cautiousness. Our soldiers and their treasure are precious. But just as I was with a number of our men and women this past Saturday who had been to Iraq or Afghanistan or prepared to go elsewhere, our soldiers are always prepared to defend the needs of people who cannot help themselves. But I call upon today the recognition that the United Nations has to fix itself. for as a consensus was coming together for the right approach, possibly UN troops to maintain the peace, as was done in places on the continent of Africa, who raises their selfish voices? Two countries, China and Russia, veto the consensus of many to try and help these people who are in need. Children, women dying in the streets, not able to live in peace. So I believe that those who had an idea need to go back to the Security Council. They need to make sure that we know that the UN is the entity that it was crafted to be in the late 1940s, the voice of reason, the ability to step in. And they need to pressure these two, in essence, outlanders, those who want to stand out of the circle of care just because of selfish reasons of oil, to get out of the way or be part of the team. I believe it is important as well, for as we look at Libya and its quietness now, working quietly to try and restructure, many people fought against that. I was delighted to be with a number of my colleagues, the first members of the United States Congress, to go stand in front of the Libyan embassy and say that Gaddafi must go. Sometimes you have to step out of the circle of comfort. I ask Syrian Americans to stand up and be heard. Go to the United Nations. Ask that your countrymen be saved. Let us hear your voices. And likewise, I ask for Egyptian Americans. We've been allies with Egypt for a long time, and I am trying to understand the tension or the confusion between governments. But my point is, this is a government-to-government issue. Let my people go. Let the Americans go. You can find no basis that they have intently, with intent, done anything that deserves that they are, one, indicted, and two, cannot travel out of the Egyptian boundaries. I call upon Egyptian Americans to rise up and be heard, for our alliance is better than a few Americans. And I take great issue with Republican presidential politics trying to claim this is the same thing as the hostages in Iran. Let us make no political statement about this. These are Americans. We want them out. We want them out now. But the idea is that there must be some responsible leadership in Egypt to recognize that spoiling or ending the alliance between Egypt and the United States is not worth this petty action. So I ask for Syrian Americans, Mr. Speaker, and Egyptian Americans to go to my website, Sheila Jackson Lee. You can find it. Let me know what you want to do and how you're going to support the efforts of making peace or having peace in Syria and saving our fellow Americans in Egypt. Now is the time. It is no time for languishing in fear. I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Thompson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, last month we heard some productive talk from the President during his State of the Union address. His acknowledgement that we need increased domestic production of oil and natural gas was quite promising. Or maybe his commitment, and I quote, to fight obstruction with action. You know, those types of words are always welcome in this chamber. Unfortunately, the President's action, or lack thereof, continue to fall short of the rhetoric. Mr. Speaker, there continues to be a great divide between the words and the speech the President delivers and his actual actions or leadership. Despite a pledged commitment to energy security, this administration has worked to counter attempts at making America's energy future more secure. The President's denial of the Keystone XL pipeline, which has the potential to create thousands of jobs and add to our energy security, is just the latest example. Between the energy resources that would be provided by a constructed, completed Keystone pipeline and the domestic natural gas fields in the United States that are in production right now, we could shut off the valve of dependency on Middle East oil. In the House, we've advanced dozens of bills to expand domestic resource production and encourage new job creation, almost all of which have been denied consideration by the Senate. With any hope, the President will meet his commitment to fight obstruction with action by calling on the Senate to work with the House on these important initiatives. With almost 2 million more Americans out of work since taking office, the American people are looking for more than just talk. Mr. Speaker, the American people are looking for things that they've not seen in Washington: leadership by the President and action by the Senate. Now yield back the balance of my time.
Pursuant to Clause 12, paren A of Rule 1, the Chair declares the House in recess to the hour of 12 noon today.
The House recessing until noon Eastern. When they return, lawmakers will take up a bill granting the